I was born in Zimbabwe, being able to spend time in the bush, hunting animals, being subject to a lot of bullying. My career took its toll in the sense that I was busy, traveling often, was very impatient with my children. The SOL telescope is the biggest telescope in the Southern Hemisphere, teaching me a lot more about working with people and not just focusing on outcomes and on a project. I work on the part that is being constructed in South Africa.
Hello and welcome to another edition of My Story. And today we have Gerhard Swart with us. And I can tell by your accent that you are not from the UK.
Yes, indeed. And you should have heard me when I arrived in the UK. I think it's going better now. I was born in Zimbabwe, which was then Rhodesia, and grew up on a farm. And yeah, it was a wonderful time for me growing up, being able to spend time in the bush, actually hunting animals, avoiding the elephants and the leopard that were on the farm. At the age of 7, I ended up in boarding school. That had quite a big impact on my life. Being away from my family, obviously, and yeah, being subject to a lot of bullying at a young age, which was quite tough for me.
Yes, that's horrible, isn't it?
Yes, in the end, it was really just God that carried me through in that time. I got to know the Lord at a very young age. My mom tells the story that when I was 4, there were missionaries visiting us, and after the service, I said I wanted to accept Jesus into my life.
Lovely.
And she prayed with me, and I wasn't very well as a child. I had rheumatic fever, so I was ill. And she also says, she would often walk past my room and I would be praying, and saying, that's all that makes me feel better.
Oh, it's lovely, isn't it?
And, it's such a privilege to grow up in a Christian home.
Yes.
And to have, really just experienced God's goodness from such an early age. Wonderful, loving parents, not perfect, as no parents ever are.
But quite a Christian heritage. And haven't you made a book about it?
Yes, indeed. Our first sort of Dutch forefathers arrived in Africa around about 1780.
Oh.
And traced it from there and really just sort of noted the generations. But then from my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, him and my grandmother, they actually stayed on the same farm as my father did. There were 10 children in total. And so I have many cousins. And so I put the book together really also just as a testimony of God's goodness, because my grandfather was a lay preacher. And my father, really was, had a strong Christian faith, and my mother's family had a huge impact. That was my early school career.
Yes. What did you want to do in life?
So at high school, there was a teacher, our science teacher, Mr. Grant, lovely man that really, invested so much in us as children, and he was really a good role model. And he had a science club that he started at school and an electronic club where you could come in the afternoon after school and just play with chemicals or play with little transistors and old radios and solder them together and make machines that make funny noises or shock people or whatever. And I used to just love that.
I'm sure.
So that's always just been my ambition to become an engineer from a very early age.
And did you go to university and study for that?
Yes. So in 1980, the whole political situation in Zimbabwe changed, or Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. And I then went to study in South Africa, in Pretoria, electronic engineering. And my parents then left Zimbabwe to actually also go and live in South Africa. As did all my siblings. So I studied electronic engineering. It was a challenging time as a young man, although I really believed in God and I had a sort of strong relationship with Him.
Yes.
You go through a lot of temptations in those early years.
Of course.
So I battled quite a bit with pornography, And just through God's grace was able to overcome that. Met a wonderful woman who's my wife today, Elise. We got married after I'd finished studying. Went to live on a small holding outside the city because having come from the farm, that was my greatest desire.
Of course, yes.
And
the big wide country.
yes. Yeah, and then we had 2 wonderful children, Yaku, the oldest, and daughter Elsa Marie, while we were still living there. My career took its toll in the sense that I was busy, traveling often, and Elise developed postnatal depression with the birth of our daughter.
Oh dear.
And she had severe back problems. Yeah, so when the children were young, it was really a difficult time for us. And through God's grace, there was physical healing and spiritual healing taking place. But for us as a family, we could be considered a hurting family. I was very impatient with my children.
Oh, were you? Can't imagine that.
And God is so gracious. He just gave us a promise at that stage, that He would be training up our children and that they would be getting to know God. I think it's in Isaiah 43 where He speaks of the one will say to the other, I serve the Lord.
Yes.
And that was just a promise to us, that our children would be serving God, and secondly, that there would be blessing. And that whole passage is so rich. And with that promise, we moved to Cape Town, which is a quieter city, a lot less rushed, lovely sea, lovely mountain,
Yes.
beautiful nature. And I started a new job there, working on telescopes.
Oh, right. Okay. What sort of telescope?
Yeah, so the first one that I started there with is called the Southern African Large Telescope, or SALT telescope. It's an optical telescope. The SALT telescope is the biggest telescope in the Southern Hemisphere. So it was a massive project with lots of international partners, and I had the privilege of playing a sort of a lead technical role on that, learning so much from amazing people across the world. And we had to go and live in Sutherland, this town, in the middle of the desert for 18 months while we were commissioning the telescope. In our move to Cape Town, we had started attending a wonderful Christian church. And even while at Sutherland, we were commuting back and forth quite often.
Yeah.
And God really used that to bring a great amount of healing to Elise. And through prayer ministry and through teaching of the word and through lots of different things that He just brought into our lives, we healed as a family. And at that point in time, Elise said, she needs to celebrate this, we need more children. So Vian, our second son, was born just before we moved to Sutherland, and Peter, our third son, was born while we were there. And it was an amazing celebration to have these 2 beautiful children added to the family.
Yes, they're sort of 2 families, really.
Almost. It was nice to have the older 2 babysit the younger 2.
That's excellent idea. Oh, lovely. So how did life progress? Did you stay in your telescope, or did you go on for something else?
Yeah, so at the end of the telescope project, 4 of us that were working together quite well as part of the project said, okay, what next? My one colleague was really studying what was happening in the world with regard to energy and to oil and climate change. And he realized that that would present an opportunity to South Africa as a country to develop a homegrown automotive industry. Because although South Africa has a powerful automotive industry, most of it is foreign owned and just exports vehicles. So the manufacturing is there, but there's no R&D.
Right.
So we applied for government grants to do research and development in electric vehicles and the related technologies. And we were successful. And we went on to develop an amazing electric vehicle called the Joule. We went through 3 generations of prototype. We grew the company to 107 people. And
wow, that's quite a size.
yeah, it's quite a significant
yes.
engineering capacity that we had. We were partnering with several organizations across the world to help us in this process, including, German engineering companies that were doing similar things for, the big brand names. And yeah, we took the prototypes to automotive shows across the world, very well received, and that really just gave us the courage and I guess the boldness to say, we need to go into the global market with this vehicle.
Yes.
And the government ended up withdrawing their funding.
That's sad.
Very sad. And we had to close the company. Yeah, South Africa doesn't have an electric vehicle anymore.
That is so sad, and you were nearly there.
Yes.
So have you ever had doubt in your life?
There have been many times. I think having seen God, even in my early life, be faithful has helped me a lot. But when you really go into, a challenging time, to remember that and not start doubting is a challenge. And I think there were 2 times that really stand out to me. The one was when Elise was going through a depression. And it was really, really tough for me as her husband to cope, to help keep the young children, just take them through the day. And I go to work and come at home in the evening, and clearly, they need more attention or whatever, That was really challenging, and really just crying out to God in that time was, it was tough. And you sort of wonder, is God going to carry you through this? And I just had no choice, and God was faithful.
Yes.
The second time was during the electric vehicle development, when we realized that the government was busy withdrawing the funding, and we were still trying to keep going, and I had to engage with the employees and just try and be courageous and help them. And so let's just try, let's carry on, let's push through. And you realize, but it's livelihoods, people's livelihoods that you're talking about.
Of course.
And it that was really the toughest, is being able to is having to say goodbye to those people at the end of the day.
Yes.
And realizing that you were part of this company, you were part of, you appointed them, you invited them to come and join you, and now they on the street without a job.
Yes. So tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But once again, I really believe God was faithful even to them. That was really my prayer for that time.
Yes, that's great. So I guess you then had to decide what you were going to do next.
Yes. Some of my colleagues, when we closed the company, were without work for a long time, but through God's grace, I was able to, get a job even before we managed to close completely. I was offered an opportunity at one of the universities in Cape Town to do research in lithium-ion batteries, because that's the thing that really makes an electric vehicle possible today, is the amazing battery technology that you do get. And so, I started there, doing lithium-ion battery research as a chief engineer in one of the institutes there. It was a time when God was really showing me a lot of why things went wrong, during the electric vehicle as well,
yes.
And what I had done wrong, and teaching me a lot more about working with people and not just focusing on outcomes and on a project. And it was really so refreshing also to be able to work with young students and impact their lives, and not just focus on on the outcome again. We had a series in church talking about the fact that we are the light of the world. We carry the light of the world, Jesus' light. And that really challenged me to try and figure out, in this environment, how do I do that? And at that time, I was invited to give a short talk to prospective students that were, at a university open day, and tell them about what we're doing. And the university I was working was not particularly God-fearing, if I can put it that way. And the Vice-Chancellor spoke just before me, and he started his talk with a slide showing Adam and Eve in the garden, and he asked the young children, okay, so who of you believe in Adam and Eve? And a couple of them stuck up their hands. And then he said, at this university we will teach you that that's just a myth, that we will be teaching you about science, we will be teaching you about the real things in life, and that all this religious nonsense is just nonsense.
What a challenge.
And so then I had to now stand up and speak, and I was just praying, saying to God, how on earth do I do this now? And through His grace, the Vice-Chancellor had to leave the room to a next appointment. And I then just had the boldness to say to these children, I believe in Adam and Eve. And I just sensed that in the spiritual realm, it was like hitting a pig into the ground.
Yes,
saying,
absolutely.
it's a proclamation of, what God is saying. And I was able to share that, share the work that I do. And what is interesting is the head of our institute, a Russian professor, he came to Elise at one of the first functions we had there, and he said to her, you know what, when your husband walks into the room, there's light.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And as an unbeliever, he said that, and he had a spiritual meaning behind that, obviously.
Yes, yes.
And later, he actually would come to me and ask my advice on raising his children. And we would end up with spiritual discussions, and I was able to share the gospel with him. As part of the university work, I spun out a company doing lithium-ion battery manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So while the battery company that I was working in was still going well, there was this job advertisement for here in the UK for a sort of an engineering position on a project called the Square Kilometre Array. Now, that is a radio telescope project to build, the largest radio telescope on Earth. And this looked very interesting to me, but things were going well. I had felt God, using me in South Africa, and I had a passion for South Africa. But yet there was this nudge to apply for this position. And I applied, and when I came for the interview, our pastor was once again busy with a series talking about how we should be impacting the marketplace, how we're carrying Jesus' presence where we go. And I was really challenged. Now, how do I do that amongst these astronomers and these very important people, and in these big meetings where I will be? And Elise was praying for me at that time, and in one of the prayer meetings, the pastor just said to her, he senses God says, just love them. And so she called me with that message, and it was an amazing thing for me to be able to go into these meetings, recognizing that I'm sitting with people here that need love, that need God's love.
Yes.
And even during the meetings, being able to silently just pray for them and interact completely differently to what I would have. Anyway, I was there in these meetings, and the job wasn't awarded at that time. But later on, when we had to close this battery company, there was the job was advertised again, or a similar job was advertised, and I was able to apply for that and got the job. And so in 2017, we moved to the UK.
You've left half your family behind, haven't you, I believe? I mean, you have your two lovely younger sons with you, but how hard did that come?
Yes, that's quite a challenge. we were a very close family. We still are.
Yes.
And so leaving them behind was really difficult. Our daughter now lives in Austria, so we are really spread out. And I'm just so privileged once again by God's grace allowing me to travel back to South Africa quite often, just as part of this project, because as it happens, part of this telescope is being constructed in South Africa, another part in Australia, and I work on the part that is being constructed in South Africa. So I still have regular contact with them. What is making it more difficult is their 2 grandchildren now.
Ah, yes,
and,
of course.
We miss them.
Yes.
And yeah, but they do remember us, and the technology is wonderful to be able to share conversations with them.
Yes.
And I still do have a great love and passion for South Africa.
Yes.
We know that
yes, always.
God has good plans for South Africa.
Yes.
And so that really for me is a major prayer challenge, to carry on praying for South Africa and the president and the politicians there.
Yes.
And I believe that God is still using what we're doing, even through the Square Kilometre Array project, to be impacting South Africa, to be
of course.
creating new employment opportunities. And so that's really, for me a great passion still, looking at South Africa.
There's 2 things that I get from your testimony. One, God's goodness to you and his guidance. But the other thing is that you're the light that comes into the room. And tell us, how is that ongoing in your work life now?
God has been just showing me, as he did with that first word around loving them, that's still the key. And even now at New Year, when I've been thinking back over the past year, God reminded me again, look at the people you work with, engage with them, don't just focus on the work. Ask them about their families, ask them how things are. Be real, be loving. And that's how God is actually showing his light. That's how he's showing his love, because God is love. And unless we are revealing that and showing that, they won't recognize the true character of God. People have, lots of notions of who God is and who Christians are. But if we really carry the love of God and the truth in a way that is tangible and touches their hearts, then it will really go, sort of break through the barriers. And so, that's my challenge for this year that God has given me, is to, not just focus on the engineering, but be a people person too.
Yeah, but he puts us in these positions to bring glory to him, doesn't he? And to seek others and impact their lives as well.
Absolutely.
And amazingly, your office is on the site of the Jodrell Bank radio telescope.
Yes.
We take our grandson there occasionally because it's here on the Cheshire plain. But for decades it was the largest radio telescope in the world, wasn't it?
Yes.
So what is the challenge about this new telescope?
Yeah, so it's a radio telescope, meaning that it actually collects radio waves coming in from space. So it's more like, let's say, a radio, that you would know, listening to the radio waves and interpreting that. And although the scientists would be making images out of that, the processing of that is very different. And that also means that there's a huge amount of software that goes with that. And it's very complex mathematics underlying the telescope. And so getting to the bottom of that and really understanding the mathematical processing is quite a challenge.
Yes.
And so for me, working, sort of at that technical level is a challenge. But then also the fact that we're working with so many different international partners providing different parts of the telescope, and each part has to work with the associated parts in a way that, if you put them together, actually creates a coherent design of the telescope.
Yeah.
And so, you've got a huge amount of technical coordination, technical interfaces, lots of detail that has to be coordinated across multiple organizations, multiple people. And so for me, that's a huge challenge. And so I struggle with that. And it's awesome that I could take that to God and pray about my work. You know, He's not just interested in the spiritual stuff.
Yes.
And I've found that so many times where, you know, when I get stuck, I pray about it. So I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with an insight, technical insight that I believe God has given me. And, you know, in a meeting, you know, just sort of realizing, okay, but if, you know, if I say this, it's going to go in this direction, or this is the answer, or this is how we should do it. And it's not, I know, because I know my restrictions. It's not me, it's not my brilliance, it's God. But yes. I know I can't say that easily, because people think, you know, that you're trying to sound great if you say it was God that gave me the idea.
Yes, yes. Gerhard, would you like to pray for anybody who's in a situation at work where they know they've got to love people, and, you know, how does God lead them in that situation where there are non-believers around, or however the Holy Spirit leads you? Just pray.
Lord Jesus, thank you so much that you love us, and that you indeed say in your word that you love the world, and that you gave your life for the world. And I pray for everyone that's listening, Lord, that needs to be just filling your shoes in a certain sense, and being your hands and feet wherever they go, in their workplace. That's a tough one for us to do, Lord, and you know that. Thank you that you know each one of them. And I pray for your love to be just flowing through, to be leaking out, to be touching those around them. I pray for insight and for grace, for knowledge, so that the right words would come when people ask. And that you yourself, through your Spirit, Lord, would be just creating those opportunities and opening hearts. Thank you that you guide us in our work, that our work is important to you, that you are glorified by what we do. And I pray for my brothers and sisters out there, Lord, that you would indeed just be encouraging them in their work, especially if they're in a workplace where it's tough. And we just praise your great name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. That's been lovely to hear your story and learn about you and your family and God's goodness above all things.